to the episode 7 of Grognards of Gaming, or Grognards of Gaming, or Grognards of Gaming, however you want to pronounce it. And you may recognize me, but you might not recognize my co-host today. This is my good friend Mike. Everybody who has been following Grognards of Gaming knows Mike, whether you realize it or not. Mike featured prominently in episode 1 of Grognards of Gaming in my origin story. Mike is the man, the myth, the legend who introduced me to role playing, and also while we after we had been role playing for some time, introduced me to a whole new uh, gaming company, which would have been White Wolf when they came out with Vampire. So uh, Phil, who you're used to seeing me co-host with, couldn't join us. Some things have come up for Phil, and it's a little bit difficult for him to continue to make the Grognard episodes. So I asked Mike if he would like to take over with Phil's blessing. And should Phil's schedule open up a little bit in the future, he will be joining us for a three Grognard panel. So, Mike, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers and let everybody know briefly how you came into gaming and how you started. Tell us your origin story.
As Rob said, he mentioned me in episode one, and we met at a very tender age, um, and started gaming very early on. Probably almost 40 years now. We've probably been gaming together. And now I started pretty young. This is something you may not know. Uh, Kirby, my cousin, is the one who introduced me to gaming on a visit. I was living in Philadelphia, he was living in Florida. And I went down on a visit to visit the family down there and go to SeaWorld and places like that. And he introduced me. I found a book on his bookshelf for Dungeons and Dragons, and it intrigued me. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time. Um, so I started looking into it and getting into it, reading a lot of fantasy books and things of that nature. Never found anybody to play with. So, when I ran into Pat Caroli, kind of a good friend of ours, and yourself, that's when I actually started actively gaming. I'd been reading about it probably for a couple of years before that, but that's pretty much how I got started, and then really took off when I met all you guys, and you know we started doing it in basements and in dining rooms and things of that nature.
That's tremendous. Yeah, okay. And I didn't know that it was Kirby who got you into it. Eventually, for our viewers, Kirby did move to Philadelphia, and so he actually joined the gaming group that we already had going. And little did I know, he actually was the spark that started that whole fire. We're gonna have Kirby on as a guest and get to the bottom of how he got into gaming, because I need to know where it all started. Where did it start? All right, so when we last left off at Yards of Gaming, Phil and I, we were talking about a variety of things, and our last episode segued us into the idea of talking about uh, the cheater or the toxic player. And so I thought it might be nice, Mike, if we kick off your inaugural episode, where maybe you and I discuss that topic, and see what wisdom we can impart upon our viewing audience, for younger gamers or other grognards who just like to hear other grognards talk. Um, so why don't you start? And as kids, we often have that sort of underdeveloped super ego. So it might not be surprising that a kid might fudge things, might cheat a little bit, but I actually see grown adults doing this, or people who should have outgrown that long ago. What kind of things have you seen, either when we were kids or as adults, where folks around the gaming table might be doing something a little underhanded?
The earliest one, and like you said, when we were young, most people who are introduced to games when they are young are introduced to the concept of you have to win the game. And there's been a lot of documentation, a lot of thoughts around the fact that that's not how role playing games really work. It's not a matter of winning the game, it's part of the experience. But I think we all come into the gaming with the idea of we have to win. And then there are the people that take it to the next level and do anything they have to do to win. A lot of times it starts with hiding rolling your dice. That's 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 one of the best ones that's early on. The other thing is, another way that might people, and this happened more a lot in paper sheets, which people still use. We all do, but putting things on your sheet that weren't there last session. Uh, or places that track ability scores, adjusting and tweaking them just a little bit. Um, you know, the, these are the things. Now, some of that has come into in more modern gaming, what they call min maxing, where you're building your character to do something specific very, very well and very strongly, and this is your purpose, and you try and lead RP into the direction of doing things that way. Um, and some of that is acceptable. If you're playing in a group and you're the fighter, you're the tank, you're the guy that you're the person that takes all the damage. Perfectly fine. Um, some people take it, and where we get into the toxic is to the detriment of everybody else's enjoyment. Now, I don't think, at least in our group, I don't think we ever really ran into that level of toxicity. I have seen it in other groups myself, more online. I do a lot of virtual gaming, as you know. I've seen it more online where um, you know people get tired of how a particular person in the group is acting. Um, whether it's trying to redrive the story, change how people tell their story, or things of that nature. And that's where it tends to get toxic, where it doesn't become fun for everybody. Um, and that's a lot of the toxicity I see now. And it makes me wonder, you know, those of us who have done this for a long time, Grognards, as you say, um, we grew out of the fact that you have to win the game. Some of the people that are coming in now as young adults or older adults are still in that old game mentality of I have to win. And some of that may be what drives some of the toxicity you may see today. Eventually, you grow out of it. You get to understand it's a collaborative story. Um, but I wonder, how many of these people that people may consider toxic are experienced versus new to the playing environment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I think that that the board gaming industry has addressed this a little bit because now we've started to see the advent of cooperative board games and so not so many competitive board games. And so the one could have experience with cooperative board gaming and then not have such trouble when it comes to transitioning to the role playing game. So that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. And you mentioned a couple of dice, what I call them dice artifices. So yeah, there's the lie, right? Just the flat out lie. It's just like, oh yeah, I because the GM is behind the screen, and so he's not necessarily looking. So you might say, oh yeah, yeah, I succeeded or whatever. But then if you've got, it's a little harder if there are other people around the table. So then there's the scoop and dupe, which is what I like to call it. You roll it, you see it's a failure, you scoop it up and you say, "No, yeah, I succeeded." The scoop and dupe. I come up with
Yeah.
like these Seinfeldian terms for this stuff. And then we start to get into like we start to get into the sort of the gray areas, like the crappy cracked die. Or what I like to call it, the fair weather reroll. So it's like you roll the dice. One die is off your notepad or something, and if it's helpful to you, you'll say you'll leave it as it is. If it's not helpful, you say, "Oh well, this die is cracked." There's that one, and and then but then there's the slightly premature roll, where you might roll ahead of time and before the GM has really fully explained what roll you need to make. And it's similar to the fair weather reroll. It's like if the roll you prematurely rolled is a success, you may leave it alone. But if the roll you prematurely rolled doesn't work, you go, oh yeah, I wasn't listening. I wasn't finished listening to your. Let me scoop these up and go ahead. What were you saying? It's like so there are these little subtle tricks that people sometimes use.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah. And the good way, that one you're talking about, the good way I've seen that done is somebody just sits there and constantly rolls the dice.
That's clever, right? So it's they're almost always camouflaged. You never know when the that's hilarious.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and you mentioned character fudging character generation. So my question is, what do you as a game master, Mike, what do you do in these instances? When you witness it, when you catch it, they think you haven't, but you have. What do you do?
It depends, it's for me. It's there is no black and white, cut and dry. Okay, and the reason I say that, and we'll probably get into this from the from the GM side a little bit, um, is it detrimental to the story? Is it detrimental to the other characters? Does it benefit the other characters if this person succeeds versus this person fails? Some of that plays into how I address it. You know, I have called people out at the table for it. Absolutely. Um, and for me, one of the ways I have addressed that, we do a lot of virtual gaming. Uh, there is no way to hide the virtual roll of the dice. It rolls in front of everybody.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it records everything. Um, but it really to me depends on the how and the why. You know, if I'll call somebody out if they're doing it for something that's inconsequential. It doesn't mean anything. Why are you, you know, why are you, faking the role? Um, but if it's story driven, if it's good for the group part as opposed to just good for the player, I might let it go. But it's very situational for me. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely situational. You're absolutely right, and all of those things can play into it. It's tough for me because more often than not, you're sitting around the table with your friends, and you don't want to embarrass your friends. You don't want to call them out. If I am going to call it out, if I think it's really great, I'll probably do it as a joke, like, "Oh, come on, you that was a little premature that die roll." Like I might do it like make it
Okay.
funny so that everybody laughs to take the pressure off. But yeah, there are times when it's like, oh, come on, that person, that wasn't right, and I just think to myself, you know what, I'm gonna let it go because it's not worth hard feelings over it. But that as we've gotten older, has happened less and less, fortunately. And if you're in a con setting or you're running at a convention, then it's again, it's a whole different dynamic. Those people, you don't even know them,
Yeah.
and so you know yeah, it's a tough situation. It is situational. What I do, it depends on a lot of things. I make the game day decision in the moment. Um but I think probably the only the way to handle it without hurting feelings is you let it go, but then next time when you ask somebody to roll, you have to lean over the shield now and communicate to them. Now I'm watching this, and that will often deter this kind of behavior. There are other subtle ways to sort of get around it, but yeah, it's tough. I don't like it. I never liked it. Now you mentioned excuse me, you mentioned similar dynamics that happen on the other side of the shield. And
Yes.
this is the whole flip side of the coin. Um, so are we, you and I as GMs, are we hypocrites talking about this when I mean I could point to countless times behind the shield where I have fudged rolls. Um, and
Oh yeah.
is that cheating or is it not cheating? What are your thoughts on that?
So again, it's you know okay. So let's talk about different situations. And something that's come up recently when we have played. Um, there are times when I'll ask two of you to roll 20-sided die, and I don't tell you why or what it's for. And I may refer to a chart on my side or something of that nature that brings up the results of your roll. So is that cheating? Keeping a surprise for the player. Um, a lot of the rolls that I roll when I'm game with you guys are very upfront. I show them up front. Combat specifically. Combat, I keep up front. Other things I may keep behind, but I fudge rolls again to move the story along or to make a better experience for people. It's also you know it's you're preserving the mystery of the story. So it's not. I don't see it as a cheat necessarily. You are you know and this will lead into other stuff, but you're preserving the mystery of the story. it's not as fun when you know everything that's going to happen. Or, you're looking at that and you're going, you look at a damage roll and you're going, oh my God, that's going to kill me, or this. Some of the mystery, behind it is fun. And I've done it both ways. Um, but I don't think it's as much cheating because you are proctoring the game. You are um, not necessarily in charge of the story, but helping direct where the story goes. So it's, you know, you're setting up something of a mystery, something that's fun for the players. So I don't necessarily see that as cheating.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you've hit on it. And this, I may be saying this because I am a GM, but I think that this is a lot easier to answer than it is when it happens on the player side of the shield. Because, yeah, that's exactly it. It's kind of like in the criminal justice system. If you've got to err one way or another, we tend to err on the side that sort of helps the criminal defendant, so that you're not taking rights away from somebody. And it's kind of that same mechanic. Like when you're gaming, if you're going to err, if it's going to help the story, if it's going to move the story along, if it's going to, excuse me, if it's going to inure to the benefit of the player characters, then it's a bit more forgivable than if the GM is fudging roles in a way that uh, slows the story down, or slows the player characters down, or hinders the player characters, or harms the player characters. I mean, of course, we could go to the extreme and say, well, it's hard to make a case that it's okay to fudge a role when you're doing it vindictively against a character, vindictively against a player's character. And it's hard to make a case for that. But when you're, um, you've got young players around the table, and you don't want to traumatize them. You want them to get to the end of the story, so that they have fun, and your fudge and rolls, that's probably the furthest on the other end of the extreme. Like, that's a perfectly okay. Like, hardly anybody would complain about that. Now, there are purists, and I've been in these conversations on role-playing game forums where they're saying things like, no, there's no fudging behind the shield. If you're fudging behind the shield, you're not playing the gaming system. You're playing some homebrew. And you gotta, you just fess up to it. I mean, if you want to play a homebrew, play a homebrew, but don't call it playing D&D 5e, because that's not D&D 5e. I'm picking on D&D. That wasn't the context of the conversation. It was a different gaming system where people were being purist about it. But I can understand that. There there is an element to it where uh, you come to a game, and you're expecting to play that game. And if you're going to home rule things too much, then the people who came to that game to play that game can feel disappointed. They could be like, look, I invested a lot of time reading the books, learning the system, thinking about strategically how to make the system work for me, and you're just throwing like a lot of the rules out the window. Now that may be a little bit different than what we're talking about, where you're fudging die roll. But I do see their point. So there is definitely a line, I think, that one might not want to cross over. You do want to feel your players out about that. One thing comes to mind in that respect is, I was running a Star Wars Saga Edition game for a group of players, and we had decided to sort of streamline a certain mechanic. I don't know if it was just for the scene or if it was permanently. Or we had decided in the scene to streamline it for the scene, and possibly keep it that streamlined for the rest of the game. And everybody was sort of buying in on it. Yeah, yeah, all right, that sounds good. And one brave person sort of raised a hand and said, "Wait, I don't want to do that. I can't play Star Wars Saga Edition, and this isn't Star Wars Saga Edition." And so I think if you get all of the players buy-in, that's one thing. If somebody's objecting, yeah, it's a valid point, and it's something that again comes back to player contract, which Phil and I discussed in our last
Yeah.
episode. You don't want to violate the player contract. So that is a segue to the next version of this topic I wanted to talk about. But I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you wanted to say about that. Okay, so
Nope.
in the last episode, it was my discussion with Phil about the player's contract that gave Phil the idea that perhaps in this episode we might talk about the cheat, and so forth. And so he suggested we should talk about the cheat and the toxic player, people who violate the player contract. And so that brings me to other toxic players besides those who will fudge dice rolls, besides what is going on behind the GM side of the shield. Um, I have encountered other toxic behavior uh, in a gaming group. So, for example, um, provocateurs, people who have to inject their politics, their religion, sex into the gaming story. Like, people are not interested in having debates around the table. That kind of spoils the fun for everybody. Then then you've got the bailer, person who bails out all the time, like, oh, I can't make this game. And it's like, look, everybody is entitled to have a life. But when it becomes regular, it kind of it's difficult for the GM who's I I mean if I think if you're a good GM, you're trying to think of ways to give everybody equal time in a session. And if somebody is constantly bailing, that makes it extremely difficult. Um, and then the rules lawyer. But I could go on. Let's hear from you. What other toxic players do you encounter?
Well, and it's you mentioned some of them, but the other one and the one that always gets me, and this is commonly called metagaming. And there's different kinds of metagaming that people do. Some of it I don't mind. There's there's little to the level that um, things that they may know about the gaming system, like the rules lawyer, but it's not negative. It's if their armor class is this, then I need this to hit, and so on and so forth, and that's fine. But then you get the metagamers, and probably the most famous metagaming reference that I've seen is, oh, we're going into troll country. Everybody better have their fire. Player knowledge versus character knowledge, and it's um, and I've had one of my favorite ways, because I have actually brought it up on forums. One of my favorite ways to deal with that, which some people consider a GM cheat. You know, I changed the stat on the monsters. It's not fire anymore. They're vulnerable to it's X, lightning, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a different breed of troll.
Right.
I have done that to foil that particular type of metagaming before.
That's a
Um,
really good idea. So, like, it's like these are mud trolls, and mud trolls, are affected by lightning. Now, if I like that, that's a really good idea.
So that's one of them. Now, the Baylor, I get. We've addressed that, not necessarily Baylor, because I don't think we've had a common problem with it. Um, but oftentimes, when a player bails, they will let either another player or the GM run their character where it's useful. Like if you're missing your cleric and your healer, you don't have that. But yeah, and it's you get that sometimes. And again, like I said, it's you go on the other side, like I said, where you tweak things as the GM. Not just monsters like that. If you're playing a packaged module that half of your players have played and they know where all the secret doors are and they know where the traps are and all things like that, and how hard the encounter sometimes. And as experienced GMs, we can do this. We've switched it up. I've redrawn maps. I've you know reworked what encounters are there. But it's a challenge, and sometimes it's not purposeful. You know, Again, it's that competitive nature, the competitive streak that drives some of this behavior. They want to win. They don't want to lose their character, so on and so forth. Um, so it's for me, it's always been a risk reward thing, and it's more fun when there's more risk because it's a better reward. But those are the typical kind of metagamers I've seen and how I've addressed them. So
Yeah, those are good ways to address it. And sometimes a toxic mix can happen just from having players around the table that approach the game from various gaming styles. In episode one of Grognards of Gaming, Phil and I talked about the simulationist, the narrativist, and the gamist approach. And so I'm thinking in particular of that story I just told you about, the Star Wars Saga Edition game, where I I had one player around the table who was a narrativist player, and one player around the table who was more simulation or gamist, and they kind of butted heads. Yeah, and as GM, as you said, you're proctoring the game, so it's really up to you as GM to sort of uh, adjudicate that situation, and bring everyone to a point where they're all comfortable with the line that you're walking. Not always easy, but hopefully with the things that we've talked about in this episode, folks will get some ideas. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I think that was a great topic, and I think that the stuff we talked about will be very helpful to people who are interested.
I hope so. And there may, as we think about it, there may be, breakout aspects of this that we can think of and expand on somewhere later down the line. But I
Yeah,
think,
that'd be great. I think
we've
that's
covered a
good.
lot of topics, and I think it works pretty well.
I think that works really well. Now, for next episode, Phil and I, we did a lot of top five favorite lists, and so I'd like to do that with you. So maybe with maybe in our next episode we can do favorite characters or favorite backstories, something like that. Is that something you'd like to do?
I think we can do that. A good top five. Yeah. It'll break me in a little bit. We can do a good top five and get it going. That sounds like a good idea.
Great, very good. And that's what we'll do next time. I look forward to it. Mike, thanks. I really appreciate you taking up the mantle of Grognard of gaming, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed this. And tune in next time for the next episode of Grognards of Gaming, where we're going to talk about favorite characters and backstories.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
Great. See you, Mike. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks. Bye.